Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Joseph, and I empower people with tangible tools to help with strengthening relationships, easing hassles, and creating more joy in relationships. Thank you for joining me tonight. Tonight, we're talking about responding instead of reacting, and this is week 5 of our School District 46, Parenting Through Difficult Times series. We have one more week, which is next week. We'll be talking about turning mistakes into opportunities to learn. And if you haven't caught the previous sessions, please feel free to jump over to my YouTube channel. It's Connect with Sarah Joseph, where you'll find the playlist of all the previous weeks. Okay, let's get started. So we're talking about responding instead of reacting tonight. And I do that every week. There we go. So I thought it'd be cool to start with just talking about our reactions and how our reactions to any situation literally has the power to change the situation itself. So let's just think for a moment. Have you ever had a situation where your child came to you crying, upset, whining about something, and you way overreacted to the situation, and that triggered your child? Or let's talk about partners. Have you ever done this with a partner where they said something, you took their tone the wrong way, and you totally overreacted to it, and then it turned the situation into something way bigger than it needed to be, right? Your reaction triggered them, and then they had a reaction which triggered you, and then it just turned into this big mess, when it may have been an overreaction to begin with, right? And vice versa. Have you ever had an experience where it was a really big thing that happened and you were able to stay calm, cool, collected, and come out of the other side feeling like you did a really good job, and that it changed the situation because the other person was able to, maybe lean into your calmness, lean into that calmness, that coolness, the collection, feeling confident in you to handle the situation. They were able to calm down. So that's what we're talking about tonight, right? Our reaction, if we're able to respond thoughtfully, can change the situation for the better. And how come, and vice versa, if we are stepping into the reaction, the knee-jerk reaction that we so often have, it can really deteriorate the situation a lot faster, or elevate it, right? Escalate it. So why is it so hard as a parent to, respond thoughtfully instead of having those knee-jerk reactions? It's hard because we have buttons, and guess who knows where they are and how to push them, right? And when our buttons are pushed, we move into that fight, flight, or freeze response, and we're triggered, right? We're triggered, so we move into those responses that are really knee-jerk responses. We're not really thinking about them. We're just feeling annoyed, frustrated, angry, and responding to that feeling instead of what's actually happening at the moment. So when our buttons are pushed, we're triggered, right? And that's really awakening up those big emotions inside of us. And some of those emotions are leftover or unresolved issues from our own childhood, or just things that really are able to push our buttons, things that we've dealt with repeatedly with our children or with our spouses, things that we, sometimes it's just because we're lacking sleep, right? Let's face it, when our window of tolerance is shrinking, or when we're under a lot of stress, then we get triggered a lot more easily. Our patience is diminished, and the triggers are more on the surface, right? They're easier to reach. Some of the triggers are left over from our own childhood, Sometimes we see our children acting in ways that we weren't allowed to act when we were children, um, or we were not supported through those feelings as children. Does that make sense? So, for instance, if you were not allowed to display anger in your household when you were growing up, and then you see your child angry, it could provoke, trigger feelings in you of of how it felt when you were a child being angry and not having anyone to support you, not being supported through that feeling. So it makes us really uncomfortable, basically, is what happens. Makes us really uncomfortable because we're feeling all kinds of feelings. We don't know what to do with them. And it sets off our guard dog or our amygdala, right? To send us into that fight, flight, or freeze response. And it cuts us off from our wise old owl or prefrontal cortex, which means that we don't have access to that part of our brain that helps us with reasoning, logic, impulse control, language, planning, right? And so what that does is it really makes us try to control our children's feelings and behavior so we can stop our own overwhelming feelings. Yeah? We're feeling so uncomfortable with what's going on inside of our bodies that we just try to like squish what's happening for our kids. Just stop that so I can stop feeling uncomfortable. Now, this is a natural response that our brain does, and it works like this. So when we are triggered, we use that fast route, low road of our brain, right? That's the route that our brain goes from the amygdala, that the guard dog part of our brain where we're feeling triggered, we're feeling emotionally overwhelmed. It senses that we're in danger. And what it does is it takes us into a danger response of acting fast without thinking. Now, let's imagine that your child has run into the street and there's a car coming towards it, right? This is the same reaction that we're going to have. We're going to have this dangered, triggered, fast route, low road response of I need to act without thinking because I need to save my child's life. So you're going to act fast and not have to think about it. So from a survival point of view, it makes sense that we would err on the side of reacting if we feel like we're in danger, and then later evaluate the situation with our slower route of the brain that goes through our prefrontal cortex, right? The problem is that that most of the time we're not in danger when our child is whining, right? It might feel dangerous at some times, but it's usually not life-threatening. Maybe just for them. So it's usually not life-threatening, right? We're not in danger, and it's just annoying us. So our reactivity is not really warranted, and it can be quite detrimental to our children, because when we are reacting with these large responses, what we're teaching them is that having their feelings are not okay, that we're not able to handle what they're feeling, right? That we're not able to manage. And so they feel in return that it's like the self-confidence, right? And the self-talk that basically how we're responding to them, they take internally as a personality flaw, as there's something wrong with me because look at my parents' response. They can't even deal with how I'm acting right now. I shouldn't be feeling this way. I shouldn't be acting this way, right? And so sometimes we don't want our children to act in a certain way based on how they're feeling. And so with that said, we need to deal with the feeling first and then with the behavior, right? And so the same comes with us. We're going to deal with the feeling first and then our behavior is going to change. So we can short, if I can speak tonight, we can short circuit this automatic fast route reaction so that we can respond with more thought. And I'm going to talk about how we do that in just a minute. But let's just talk a little bit more about what's happening with our kids. So we really do act like a mirror for our kids. We function as a mirror, right? So that's part of our brain cells known as mirror neurons. And what that means is that what they see, they reflect, okay? And so if you can imagine when when we have babies and we're looking at our babies and we're making faces at them, we're sticking out our tongues at them, they're going to try to stick their tongue out at us, right? Kids are always watching. They're always watching us, and they model what we do. So when we're acting in these big overreactions, when we're acting reactive in our parenting, what they're seeing is that this is the way that you handle big emotions, right? When you're angry, you can yell at people. When you're frustrated, you can slam things and storm off. Even babies, there's research that shows that even before babies can talk or walk, they can recognize our feelings and what feelings that we cannot handle. Mm-hmm. They know what feelings we're uncomfortable with. And if you've taken the Circle of Security program that we offer on the coast, the school district offers Circle of Security here for parents, and it's free. It's a wonderful course that talks about attachment and feelings. And this is the statistic from there, that babies 9 months old can recognize what feelings we as their parent can't handle, and can start adjusting their behavior to have their needs met without upsetting us. Interesting, right? So kids learn how to basically maneuver around what we can't deal with in order to get their own needs met. So they start what they call miscuing us. So basically, when we're reacting to situations, we are providing our children with a model of how they should respond to situations. And we're modeling how to handle emotions. And we're also very clearly showing them what feelings we can't deal with, so that they start kind of hiding or shooing away from those specific emotions. So I thought it would be really helpful if we looked at this triangle, because it's a really clear indication of how we get triggered, what the process is, right? So often I like to start in the emotions, because I think that often this starts with emotions or thoughts. But if we can imagine that, let's see, let's imagine that our trigger is over here, okay? So before the thoughts, we have a trigger, something that stimulates us. So a child whining or complaining or saying no, right? Screaming, crying, throwing a tantrum, all of these things can be a trigger. Or maybe you walk into an absolutely destroyed room with toys thrown all over the place. You can't see the floor, and that triggers you, right? So then you have some thoughts. So we like to add thoughts on. And so we often think things that will escalate us. So in this scenario, say that, let's take the I walked into a messy room scenario. I came home from work, and I expected the living room to be cleaned, and it's destroyed. And so I feel triggered, and the thoughts that I add to that situation might be what's going on in here? This is a disaster. I can't believe this mess. Who's going to clean this up? I know it's going to be me. right? I can't even handle this. I had such a stressful day at work. And all of these things are going through our mind, right? And it's just kind of amping us up. And then we might feel the emotion that's part of this situation, which would be frustration, overwhelm, anger, maybe resentment if we have a partner who's been home and hasn't cleaned it up. We feel all these emotions, right? And then that moves into our behavior. So our thoughts affect how our emotions are, and vice versa, right? Our emotions affect our thoughts. And then we move into a behavior, and our behavior is based on those thoughts and emotions. And so often it's the reactive behavior if we've had those escalating thoughts, and then we had some feelings that fed into the thoughts, and then we might have some more negative thoughts to go along with those feelings that we're feeling, and then our behavior will turn into a reactive. So we might start yelling, I can't believe what kind of mess this is, come and clean this up, guys are so messy. And then of course that moves back into our thoughts, right? And we'll go back into it because often we beat ourselves up after we have a reactive situation, don't we? Because it doesn't feel good. And we often end up doing or saying things that we don't really like. It doesn't align with how we want to parent. So we end up saying and doing things that we feel guilty about. And we feel like it didn't actually help the situation. It may have made it worse. So then we have thoughts and feelings that go along with it. And the feelings might be guilt, shame. And then that often affects our behavior as well, because we don't do better when we feel worse, do we? So when we're thinking about reactive behavior or trying to respond instead of react, one of the places that we can really change things is with our thoughts, okay? So self-talk is really important because it feeds into our behavior, right? And if we pay attention to what we're saying, then we might be able to catch the negative things and be able to change it. But this is a repeated practice. It requires the building of new pathways in our brain if we want it to be helpful in creating new behaviors. Okay, so I want you to imagine like you moved into this house, and in the backyard there's this beautiful forested area, and there's this lightly developed path through the forest. Okay, you could walk on this little path and you can see it, but it's starting to get quite overgrown, and it might, you might have to get the weed whacker out to like really get it down, or just like have a bunch of people over to stomp on it. Right? But instead you just decide to walk that path every day, and when you walk the path, it starts getting clearer and clearer, and it becomes a really well-worn pathway. The same thing happens in your brain. When you have a reaction to something and you follow that thought pattern, what happens is a path is carved in your brain. And the more often that you travel the path, travel that reaction in the same way, so feel triggered by the same thing your child does, and then have a reaction, the same reaction. So, it might be a repetitive behavior that your child does that really pushes your buttons, and then you have the same knee-jerk reaction every time it happens. Then what happens is that path in your brain gets really well worn. And because it's well worn, you're able to travel it a lot faster. So when we have this talk, it helps wear down the path, right? And what we want to do is create a different pathway that's more positive, a pathway that will help us make some space between feeling triggered and responding. Okay. And the way that we do this is really through this repeated practice of catching ourselves with the negative thoughts, and then maybe taking a break, doing some self-compassion in order to create that space and change the pathway. Now, when you change a pathway, it takes time, right? So if in that forest behind your house, you wanted to make a different pathway, it would take time of going down that pathway daily in order to create the new path, right? And if you stopped using the old path, what would happen? It would just grow over, right? And it wouldn't be clear anymore. And you wouldn't be able to run down it fast because there would be lots of twigs and grass and other things in your way. And that's the same thing that happens in your brain. When you start developing new patterns of responding, they create new pathways. And the pathways then become clearer and easier to use over time. And the old ones, the old reactions that you used to have, start to disappear. It's quite amazing. The brain is really, you're really able to change your brain, which is amazing, right? It gives us so much hope. Okay, so one of the tools that we can use in order to help create that space between feeling triggered and responding is creating a pause. And I think that we talked about a little bit about this before, but a pause is really just the practice of taking a short break when you're feeling that emotionally triggered or overwhelmed, okay? And so the idea here is to be able to recognize when you're feeling triggered. And the first step of doing that is just becoming aware of what your triggers are and what it feels like in your body when you're feeling triggered. Okay? So take a moment and think about the last time that you were really reactive with your child and see if you can recognize some of the bodily sensations that you might have felt. I know for myself, my jaw gets tight. I kind of start clenching my teeth when I'm feeling frustrated or annoyed. I also have a clenching in my stomach. My stomach kind of comes into a knot. Sometimes my breathing gets a little bit shallow, or I start clenching my fists. Some people feel hot or flushed in the face. Some people feel like they're about to cry, so their eyes might start welling up, or they get that like sensation, the tightening sensation in the back of their throat, right? All of these things, and it's really individualized. So it's different for everybody what sensations in your body you feel when you're being triggered. It's a really good practice to take some time the next time you get triggered to maybe write down in a journal or something some of the bodily sensations that you feel when you are triggered. The reason that we focus in on what our body sensations are is because our body knows before our brain knows. So as I said, when you feel triggered, it goes to your amygdala, which is the emotional seat of your brain, your limbic system, and it cuts you off from your prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of your brain. So what's happening here is you're feeling triggered and your body is responding to that trigger, but your mind is just reacting, right? So you're not really thinking. When we're able to catch what's happening in our body, then we're able to kind of play with what's happening in our mind. So it's like the body's giving us clues before the brain catches up, if that makes sense. We usually have the body sensations before the brain goes, oh, danger, oh my gosh, act, right? We feel it in our body first. So if we can catch what's happening in our body and create this pause at that point, then we're able to create that space between the trigger and our reaction. Okay. Now, one of the best ways I know to do this is to really just pay attention to what happens in your body when you're feeling triggered. Make some notes for yourself, and then just start practicing, right? When you feel that icky feeling in your belly, take a pause, take a break, take some deep breaths, and see if you can move into a more calmer space in your body where your body feels back to normal, back to balanced or grounded, centered, however you want to say it. The other thing is being kind to yourself. So I really love this self-compassion graphic by Kristen Neff. She has some great information. She wrote a book, did like all kinds of research on self-compassion. And what she found that is really helpful is being kind to yourself. So really what she talks about is self-talk, and how you talk to yourself when you're feeling upset, when you're feeling triggered, is really important. And often what we do is, as I was saying, is we talk ourselves up, and we're really harsh and judgmental about ourselves, saying things like, I can't handle this, I'm a terrible mother, I'm, I really suck at keeping my cool, right? We really beat ourselves up. And what she says is that when we are kind to ourselves, we can talk to ourselves and treat ourselves more like we would treat others. So, if your best friend came to you and was telling you how much of a terrible morning she had trying to get her child ready for school, you probably wouldn't say, yeah, and you suck, that's why, right? You wouldn't tell her bad things. You wouldn't say awful, mean things, judgmental things to her. You would try to help her feel better and build her up. But we don't do that for ourselves. So Kristen Neff suggests that we try talking to ourselves the way that we would talk to our best friend, or even maybe the way that we talk to a child that you're trying to comfort. The second is to recognize our common humanity. So this is a shared experience. All parents experience parenting stress. All people are reactive, right? It is a brain function survival mechanism that has us reacting without thinking. And that, because of this shared human experience, we know that we're not alone. And when we can tap into that feeling of not being alone, it's not just me, then that often helps bolster us and makes us feel a bit better. The other thing she mentions is mindfulness. So being open to what's happening in the present moment, acknowledging your suffering without adding onto it, exaggerating it, right? And also, I'd like to add to this, when we're dealing with kids, recognizing what's happening for us in the moment as different from what's happening for them. So it's hard to practice this. It's challenging to recognize what's happening for you. I'm feeling really uncomfortable, I'm feeling triggered, and to recognize that that was not caused by your child's experience of what's happening in the moment for them. Right? So when we're able to separate their experience of what's happening in the moment from our experience of what's happening in the moment, then we're able to, again, create space. And I don't necessarily need to squash their response, their behavior, their feelings in order to deal with my own feelings. Because hopefully through this exercise of taking a pause and being mindful of what's happening in the moment for myself and being kind to myself with some kind self-talk and recognizing my common humanity, I'll be able to deal with my own emotions, right? And so helping myself with my emotions might look like just naming it, right? This is really hard for me. I'm feeling really frustrated and triggered right now, but I can take some deep breaths. It's okay. All moms go through this. Gosh, parenting is hard, right? And so if I'm able to talk to myself like that in those moments, then the likelihood of me being more responsive, or being able to respond in a thoughtful way, in a way that I want to respond, has increased. Now, mindfulness can help. I don't know what happened. Oh, look at this. Mindfulness can help us. It's a great training tool to build our conscious awareness of what our thoughts are, our feelings, our surroundings, helping us get into that present moment experience, and being able to separate ourselves from our child's experience, and then just being really open and curious in a non-judgmental way. So mindfulness helps us with breathing and finding our calm place, or taking a pause, right? I feel like The mindfulness practice is something that we practice when we're already calm, and then we can use when we're feeling upset and feeling reactive, when we're feeling triggered. We can use our mindful tools to help us get back to the calm place. So now, again, mindfulness is a practice, right? It's not necessarily a tool that you just get and then you've got it. It's something that you need to practice over and over and over again, because it is building a new pathway in your brain. So when we practice it, we're building the pathway so that when we're triggered, we can find the pathway easily. So it doesn't need to take a lot of time to practice mindfulness. You can do it in just about 3 minutes every day. And there's lots of research that shows that if you create a little mindfulness practice of 3 to 5 minutes a day, you can really change your brain for the better. Now, I know that you're busy. All of us parents are. But if you make it priority, I'm sure that you can find 3 to 5 minutes a day to practice mindfulness. All right, so I love this little acronym to help us remember how to stop our parenting tantrum, because that's basically what it is, isn't it? We're having a little tantrum of our own. Stop, right? So we're just going to stop. We're going to try to catch ourselves. We're going to stop acting, speaking, stop trying to discipline. And we're just going to take a timeout, take a pause. We're going to maybe leave the room, right? I like this acronym, but I always get weary of the leave the room or plug your ears or look away, because I think that I pointed it out when we were talking about connection a couple weeks ago, that ignoring somebody is the worst possible thing that you can do for your relationship. So if you're going to leave a room, if you're going to look away from a baby, it's important that they know you're coming back. So you can you can prompt them, you can front load this conversation or this thing by practicing with them, right? If you have kids that are in elementary school, you can practice taking a timeout or a pause when you're upset or they're upset. Practice it together so they know what it looks like and how long you're going to be gone for. When my kids were really little, what I used to do is I used to set a timer, and I'd say, mommy needs a break, put 3 minutes on the clock, and I'd walk away. And I'd tell them, I'll be back when the buzzer goes beep, 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 mommy's coming back, right? So they would understand that I wasn't gone forever, right? And I got them practicing that too. So we would start practicing timeouts or pauses together. So kids would have their positive timeout, and we would practice that before they needed to use it, right? So when we model it, they're more willing to try it out too when they're upset. Okay, so the next step would be to organize your thoughts, right? So what is really happening right now? What am I feeling in my body? What are my thoughts? What are my feelings? Can I take a couple minutes to do some deep breathing? Can I take a self-compassion break and go through those steps of talking kindly to myself, right? And then plan. So once you're calm, you can think about what was it that triggered you, and how will you know to stop next time? How can you prevent this situation, or how can you catch yourself sooner, right? How'd you do? Were you able to create some space? Or where did you kind of falter? Again, when we're building new pathways in our brains, it takes time. And often we default back to our old pathway because it is so accessible to us, right? Because we've used it so much in the past. So when that happens, it's okay. Don't beat yourself up, right? That's the self-compassion part. You've recognized it, you have more awareness of it, and you are human. You are going to make mistakes. And that's why next week we're talking all about how to take mistakes and making them into opportunities to learn, not just for the kids, but for us too, right? Parenting's hard, and we're going to have feelings about it. We're going to get triggered. We are going to overreact sometimes. We're going to feel reactive, especially when our window of tolerance is shrinking, right? And so one of the best things I can say is be kind to yourself, be understanding and compassionate to yourself, right? And really take care of yourself, nourish yourself. Because when you are feeling nourished, then your window of tolerance opens up. You have more opportunity, more space in your mind to create that separation from trigger to reaction or response. Okay. When you're feeling super stressed, that ability to create that space is going to be really limited. So know where you're at. I want to challenge you today to check yourself. Where are you at right now in your self-care? How are you feeling? Is your cup full or is it totally depleted? How's your window of tolerance? Is it open or is it super narrow right now? Right? There are things that you can do for yourself right now, even during a pandemic, that will help you be the parent that you want to be, feel better, feel more confident, feel more patient, be less reactive, and be able to respond more thoughtfully. So think about what those things are for you. What do you need, right? What are the things that nourish you? What are the things that fill your cup and help you feel taken care of, feel good, feel like you have some overflow to give to your family. We can't give from empty cups, right? We're supposed to give from the overflow. But if you're not putting anything into your cup, if you're constantly giving, then there's nothing left to give. Okay. So next week, we are focusing on our last week, which is going to be turning mistakes into opportunities to learn. Next Monday at 8 p.m. I hope you can join me then. I'm going to end our video so we can have a discussion. And again, if you've missed the previous weeks, go back and watch them on the YouTube channel. Connect with Sarah Joseph. All right. Thank you for joining me tonight.